So, the government this week tried to prevent a rail union strike. That happened. Well, actually, it successfully did. This week, there was a ton of railroad workers from the company BNSF. You've probably seen it. Basically, 90% of the trains that are stopping you in traffic are BNSF trains. They're not notoriously known for being slow or anything. They're notoriously known for shutting down workers' unions. But originally, over 15,000 workers voted to strike this Friday from their railroad job. And this ultimately put the United States government in a position where they felt the need to utterly crush these people's freedom and then make it illegal for them to strike. That's great. And I'm going to describe why it's bad to make things illegal, or why it's bad to make something like that illegal. But the reason why they were striking is because the working conditions were incredibly low. Multiple workers had reported getting PTSD because of how stressful the job is. And on top of that, because of how overly worked they were, their response time was lower than somebody who's intoxicated over the legal limit. That's like having somebody who's way intoxicated drive a train, because it was like they were way over the legal limit because of how low their response time was. They also had this union and this strike because the company had just rolled out a new rule making it so that they could only have one day off a month. And they typically work 365 days a year because that's how a conducting job works. And throughout this time, the company had also been going from 5 workers on a train, and now they're all the way down to 1. And now suddenly the company wants to save more money so that they can rake in more profits and treat the worker terribly. I love that. But along with that, just a little fair reminder, which most people don't know and I discovered only because I made this video, is BNSF is a multi-billion-dollar company owned by Warren Buffett, which he owns the company Berkshire Hathaway, which owns a ton of companies, and that's how it's owned by Warren Buffett. This company in 2019 made $9 billion of profit, if I'm not mistaken. And suddenly now they're like, oh, but if a worker costs us a few thousand from taking a sick day, oh no, that's terrible. We can't afford to cut costs. They should be the ones who are punished. Even though they managed to go from 5 workers down to 1 already. So they're already saving like 5 times the wages, because capitalism doesn't increase jobs. Don't be a psychopath. That's not how it works. It was 4.3 billion they made in the first 9 months of 2019 alone. Along with that, BNSF actually, in this year alone, I looked this up, has lobbied over $18 billion in the House and Senate, or in Congress. And so you already know which one the government's going to be siding with. And I think that it's funny that our government made it so that they couldn't strike, because we went from FDR with like the New Deal, where FDR literally has the quote like, first thing I do when I start working at a factory is join a labor union, to this Biden, a hyper-capitalist president. It is utterly crazy when the United States government, which is like, hey, we're bent on freedom. Like, we want you guys to have all the freedom the world can give, right? But when it comes to labor unions, no. And the reason why we did that was because it would cost $2 billion a day. But regardless, I think it's funny because the United States government didn't punish the multi-billion-dollar company abusing their workers. The US government solved this problem by saying, hey, workers, you guys aren't allowed to strike anymore. It's illegal if you strike. What? Bro, how does that happen? How does a government like that advertises such a great ability of like freedom suddenly say, okay, workers, you're no longer allowed to form labor unions? The reason why we have labor unions is because the billionaires always get a voice, but the workers don't. Workers are always told they are replaceable. I know multiple people that work at the hospital, and the main things their bosses tell them is you're replaceable. So the whole thing that is the fuel of capitalism is the idea that you are replaceable. Your boss is not, even though the company can exist without most CEOs. Your boss is not because they made the company. So now they've forever instilled their position. But with you, if you get like 3 strikes a year, boom, you're gone. They'll just replace you. There's always somebody willing to work next after you. It is an utterly crazy, sadistic system, because our whole government revolves around this broken, torturous system. Which is paying people wages that they need to live, and you're always reminding them, oh, but if you work in the wrong way, or if you don't work 2 days a month, in this case, anything over 1 day a month, if you have a doctor's appointment, jury duty, because they get punished for those, then you get fired or you get punished. Yet the multi-billion-dollar company isn't paying some of that. They're just forcing the worker to pay all of it, which is crazy when companies should be taking care of their workers, because the only thing that can hold up a company is the workers. Most companies don't even know who their CEO is. I know where I work. I don't know who the CEO is. I know who my supervisor is. I don't know who the CEO is. I don't care who the CEO is, because the company can exist without the CEO and the board. The company cannot exist without the workers. The board is literally exploitative of human labor. That's all a company is designed to make profit off of. Profit is literally just excess money made from exploiting the labor of their workers. Most companies don't tell their workers how much profit they generate for that reason. It's so that they can exploit them for as much as possible. It's so that BNSF, in this case, went from 5 workers to 1, and I guarantee you they're not paying that one worker who's now doing 5 people's jobs. They're not paying them 5 times the income. There's a reason why they cut it down. And a capitalist would say, oh, it's because they don't need that. Like, they don't need 5 workers. Okay, but it was still a 5-person job. Pay the dude who you're replacing their jobs with, the one dude, pay him what he deserves. Pay him 5 times his wages. But they're not going to do that. If they paid him 5 times his wages, then I guarantee you it would be a good argument of saying, oh, well, maybe the worker should pay for this and this if this goes wrong. But he's not even making what he should be making for doing 5 people's jobs, and he's also expected to pay for what he may slightly mess up when there's a multi-billion-dollar company that owns him. It is utterly, utterly ridiculous. And another big thing that irritates me about this case is most of the rail workers love their jobs. And not love their jobs like love the company, like they love being a rail worker. It's like working as a salesman but having an exploitative company. You may like helping people, but if your company is just exploiting you, you're not going to like your job. If your workers are treating you terribly, you're not going to like your job, no matter how much you like the idea of your job. And with most rail workers, they love the idea of being a rail worker. It's not too hard for them. It's their company treats them like crap and doesn't value them. And then the US government came in and oppressed them. The US government said, okay, well, other people get the right to strike, but when you're somebody doing the job we need in the US economy, like we literally need trains to go through the US, then you're no longer allowed to have workers' rights. Or instead of entertaining those workers' rights more, because we literally need you, your value is tremendous, we're saying, no, let's listen to the multi-billion-dollar corporation, Berkshire Hathaway, and BNSF. How did we go from FDR to this? That's my question. Once again, we went from FDR with a New Deal, supporting unions, to now Biden. Like, nobody can ever, and don't let anybody ever tell you that Joe Biden is socialist, close to socialist, or has left-wing economic views. Because a president who literally was pushing through with all his might and power the idea of crushing this labor union, that can't be socialist. Because socialists support labor unions. Socialism supports labor unions. The whole idea is bringing down the multi-billion-dollar dude who is not making the sweat of his brow, who is not being exploited. The whole idea is to bring everybody out of exploitation, yet with a president like Joe Biden, we can't do that. And also, may I remind you, I'm not supportive of Trump because a Trump appointed judge was the first one to block the case. So literally with every president that we'd ever elect in this American capitalist system, they would just do the same thing. They just say, oh, shut up the rail workers because we need that one. If it's at like Starbucks, that's cool. The workers union is cool and the labor union's cool. But like, if it's something we need, even though their value is literally higher than workers at Starbucks, or in my opinion, just as valuable, but the value is different. The literal value in dollars is different. I would guarantee we all would say, yeah, the rail workers, their value is much higher. But it's like, even though that one's more obvious, no, they don't deserve a workers union. Even though they're literally getting worked until they get PTSD, workers union for them? No. The American government is a hyper-capitalist, imperialistic government, and don't let anybody tell you different. If we weren't hyper-capitalistic, then we would just hear out the workers, hear what they have to say, and then immediately, with like no thought, just punish the corporation. That's if we were not a hyper-capitalist government, and that would be in a perfect world. Sadly, and I'm not saying socialism would be in a perfect world. I'm saying that government, it would be perfect. We can do it, but because our government is greedy, we're not doing it right now. And because our government loves just jerking off the idea of capitalism being so great and not oppressing the workers and giving everybody the value they're worth, then we did this. This is the most hyper-capitalist thing you can do, because when you have a multi-billion-dollar corporation, what they're going to spend their billions on is lobbying. It is oppressing the worker. It is making sure that the worker can't afford to have a workers' union, such as these days they're going to get punished if they take a day off. And it's like, it's making sure that they can't afford to have a workers' union because then they won't have enough to pay for their next meal. And they also don't have enough time to switch jobs. Otherwise, they will go broke in that process. And they're working so much they can't search for a job. They're on a train all day. Like, They can't go get another job. Don't sit here and say, oh, capitalism's great, they can go get another job. No, they're screwed into it. They're literally just slaves on a train now because the US government doesn't care. They didn't advertise the case at all because we already know who's in the wrong. It's the US government and the multi-billion-dollar corporation. The workers weren't searching for yeah, I got you back. The workers were searching for I want to be treated like a normal human being. It's utterly, it's ridiculous. That's what it is. It's ridiculous.